Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our State of the Nation update, our 6th edition, understanding how retailers can transform and thrive during this COVID period. So I'd like to welcome everybody. And as always, if you've attended our events in the past, we welcome any questions. You can put them in through the Zoom Q&A. And we're going to host a Q&A session with all of our panelists at the end. So we'll hold all the questions to the end, but feel free to put them in at any point during the session. We'll also be sharing the session, the recorded version afterwards through our YouTube channel. So you'll receive a link to that later, or you can subscribe to our YouTube and get all of the details there. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Brian Walker, who will give us an introduction, and we will welcome all of our panelists.
Good morning and thanks everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. This is our State of the Nation number 6, and its purpose is really to work with our partners and colleagues to really assist the retail sector in these turbulent times. And so today I'm delighted in particular to be joined by Neil Stern. Neil is a board member of the Ebeltoft Group, a worldwide alliance, which we are proud to be the Australasian member for. Neil and our business goes back even further in doing projects together. So Neil is coming to us from Chicago, but travels the world and will share with us particularly what's happening in the US as a bit of a weather vane to Australia, but also what's happening globally. So welcome, Neil. Anthony Wilson, I'm delighted to have Anthony here. You might occasionally hear me refer to him as Macca, but he's a career retailer. He's founder and leader of Wilson Retail, which is 3 times Australian Retail Awards, Independent Retailer of the Year, and was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2016. He's the president of the Surf and Board Sports Industry Association. We have that mutual love. Until recently, vice president of the Australian Retailers Association. And I'll be talking with Anthony particularly around an overview of Australian retail, what's going on out there, what's it like in the coalface. And we always want retail lens through this work. So welcome, Anthony. Simon, Managing Director of Leaseinfo, wonderful business. Simon's been a stalwart through this program and will bring us up to date with legislation and changes and what's going on in there in the property and leasing, which is a very hot topic as it's been throughout this process. Belinda McPhee, HR Consulting Director, will take us through, she's done so admirably through this process, really what's going on, update, keeper, job seeker, and through the whole dynamic of HR leadership in this period and through it. Joel is the principal of Wheeler Grenfell, chartered accountants, and they are our accountants, but Joel is also a friend, colleague, has a deep understanding, and will be taking us through fiscal changes as they've announced. And of course, some of the announcements from the Treasury and government yesterday, and Joel will give us an overview of those and implications for retail. And I will start by just talking a little bit about some of the shared information from our Ebeltoft group, which we've been doing through this program. And of course, in our own market, our domestic market, if you follow the trends and the tracking, it's been a very turbulent period, as it has for many countries. And as we move through the second wave, if you like, of this virus, and states are starting to lock down in Victoria, possibly cluster lockdowns in New South Wales, which are about 45% of the national spend, we're seeing coming back into almost this lockdown mentality of consumers, retailers trying to adapt through that. So, and that's exactly what this is saying. In other countries, we see, again, reopening, still very strict social distancing rules. We're seeing cinemas, bars in countries still closed. The pandemic, the international health crisis has really hit our sectors very hard. And so what we're seeing though as a consequence is some really interesting adaptation from retailers, and that'll be the theme of today. So yes, more open globally, but in turn, still a way to go. And so we look at this business of retail globally and in our own country. And we're looking very closely at what our clients can start to think about in this transformation process as we talk about the new normal. And one thing's fairly clear, and that is that retailers will really need to systematically assess their capabilities in 5 areas. which is certainly around their revenue model, right down to category, point of difference, mix, target market, their operating model, supply chain, right through to customer experience, through to this omni-channel place, and really thinking carefully about what the new model means in terms of adaptive modeling, curbside collect, click and collect, all the various models, and Neil will touch on those. The infusion of digital, both into the physical environment and as a standalone, digital fulfillment, digital in-store, digital customer experience. Custom capital infusion, where to put capital, what is the return on capital employed, where really are we going to produce good asset growth, where do we need to cut back? And by the way, in the operating model, I'm also referring to our leadership models and our people positioning. And what I think we'll also see very clearly in this next period is a strong wave of mergers and acquisitions. So increasing work in partnerships. I think you'll see a lot more consolidation of physical retail environments, capital models acquisition. We already saw it with the eBay Gumtree overnight acquisition. And so through this exercise, this is the time now for a lot of retailers to step back, think through their model, and really position themselves differently into this next normal. And perhaps this is a way of showing that. What we are seeing, of course, is very much a current spending reduction in discretionary income as consumer confidence has taken a battering. In this country, job losses and in others are increasing as the government grinds the economy to a halt to try to deal with this, grind to a halt at one level and then try to reopen as quickly as it can. And what we'll see in this country, as we will in others, will be this process for the next probably 3 to 6 months, and then increased stimulus from the government to spend. And interestingly, in Australia, June retail sales were up, which was interesting. They were up 2.4% in June, but we still think we'll see a contraction of about 1.5%. So spending, very volatile and fragile, will be government stimulus, will be a big part of it. And Joel can talk to that. E-commerce, a big focus on this. And it's interesting to see the e-commerce numbers and this view that will they return to the new normal? And the new normal being, will they come back as people come back into stores and to retail? And I know that Neil touches on that. Right now, we're seeing shifts in purchasing, much more of a mindful purchase, focus on essentials and value, home renovation. Any businesses associated with home have really driven, or leisure, and I think Anthony will talk about growth in his sector, will certainly be spiking up those retail sales numbers. We'll see a lot more shifting of loyalty and brands. People will be much more value driven, much more focused on short-term wins in this, watching the dollars. And so loyalty will be an interesting topic to watch. Footprints, the right sizing of bricks and mortar stores and supply chain already occurring. The long tail of physical retail is starting to close. And of course, great focus on hygiene, safety products and so forth. And much more agility and mobility, not just in strategy and all the aspects we talk about, but in the workforce. And that'll be one of the key trends that we're seeing. So retailers that we work with and Neil works with are really, we're talking through these topics, working through models against these types of frameworks. And as I touched on before I pass to Neil, our consumer insights are seeing a lot stronger shift to mindful shopping, including being more mindful, consumers much more mindful of where they spend their money, changes to less expensive products to save money. These are classic symptoms of value-driven, discretionary pressure on dollars and the macroeconomic conditions we find ourselves in. So expect to see, as a touch on this, we think in the first quarter next year, we'll see much more government intervention around stimulus, and this will start to unlock a lot of these values of consumers, but this is what we're seeing at the moment. So, and here just very quickly, here are some examples of our friends and colleagues from Ebeltoft around the world are sharing with us. Here's my TV in Italy, live stream shopping. This is just examples of ways retailers are adapting to contactless retailing effectively. So here we've got streaming sessions directly, interactions via dedicated chat, immediate purchase by click-through. So you've got physical, you've still got a degree of human interaction, contactless, and you've got this omni-channel play. This is Alina Miro, and again from Italy, this personal stylist and shopping smart box. This was a pre-COVID, but it's now augmented with the use of the digital interaction with a concierge, valet type shopping arrangement linked to subscription-based. So we won't talk a lot about today, but predictive technologies will play a big part in the next 3 to 5 years. Only I think it's the French could dream of this. This one is the Aura Aware. So this one is basically, it beeps if someone is within your personal space of 1.5 meters, which I thought was intriguing. This is live stream, again from the French. Live answers to your fashion questions. Live stream with shop and staff. So it asks your questions via WhatsApp, and it gives you one-on-one fashion advice. We interestingly see a lot more integration of the WhatsApp platform into retailer adaptation. These are, some are a little quirky, but they're interesting the way retailers are thinking about it. PPE vending machine out of the US offers face masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, and so forth. It's currently 10 in New York City. I'll have to ask Neil if he's seen one. And so there we are thinking about mobility, kiosks, interaction, and providing a service in this case. For those of us who can't spend a day without a good manicure, they bring it to us in the Manicure Truck. And this is just, again, I think this one was from Italy from memory. It is as it appears to be. So you book your manicure appointment digitally, they come to you, you climb into that little back van by the look of it, and you're manicured. Perhaps Anastasia, I shouldn't be the one to be talking about this one.
Yeah, I think this one I thought was quite clever is they've got the handholds, so you stand on the outside, so you're still socially distanced while having your nails done. So I think knowing the comments at the moment, everyone will be very much intrigued to get that pampering quickly.
All interesting adaptations. And setting the scene for Neil to really take us through his view on consumer trends and retail implications through COVID-19. And really important to get this global and into US and other countries, because very much we follow this, there's a lag effect, but we follow these trends very, very closely. Thank you, Neil, and good morning, or good afternoon in Chicago.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, and thanks for having me. And also want to thank the Retail Doctor Group, which is taking the leadership among the Ableton Group companies of collecting all the insights country by country and what we're seeing. So we're grateful for you to do that. I'm going to take you through very quickly kind of what we see happening in the U.S. and unprecedented shock to the system, all the things that the rest of the world's doing, and you can add on top of that in the U.S. Extreme social unrest. So if a worldwide pandemic wasn't enough, we also have significant social unrest happening in the U.S. You can go to the next slide. I'm really ashamed in a sense for my country because we're a great example of what not to do in terms of consistency of messaging, consistency across the states of simple things like, should you wear a mask or not, social distancing. We have different rules by city, by state, by county, by on whether you can open a bar or a restaurant. And as we rush back to reopen in May, cases spiked again. So we kind of have had seen the virus kind of go away in the Northeast. It's kind of come back in the South and Western United States. These are kind of the things we're tracking, right? GDP, consumer confidence, unemployment going up, and the same thing everywhere in the world as you obviously shut down retail. We saw sales shut down. They are coming back. It does differ by category, which we can get into. But again, as we close, things are changing. I would have come to you last year and said, in 2019, well before the pandemic, when sales were strong in the US, we had a record number of store closures, over 9,000 closures. 2020, we already have more bankruptcies than we had all of last year. and the estimates are 20 to 25,000 stores closing. So we're seeing a massive number of retailers who are simply not going to make it through this crisis. And I'll just kind of, I won't read this to you, but a quote from the National Retail Federation. You know, we're often asked, obviously, to predict the future, and with all of these changes happening at the same time, it's almost impossible to predict the future right now. So I'll do my best, but just you know, making the point that there's a lot of things going on. I spent a lot of my time in the food category, and this is one of the more fascinating ones. If you look at the chart on the left, in about 2013, food away from home, food consumed at restaurants, bars, you know, outside of the house, exceeded food sold at supermarkets and at home. And you can see that bar starting to separate year on year. So the food business in the US is huge, $1.8 trillion or so, but food at home was gaining that. You fast forward onto the right, and as obviously restaurants shut down, we've seen a huge spike in food at home. 80% of sales now food at home, 20% restaurants. And the best predictions we have, it's going to take at least 12 to 18 months before we see some normalization again of those trends. So we are like a lot of places in the world, eating at home, discovering how to bake, how to cook, again in the households. And that's been obviously a boon for supermarkets and very, very difficult for restaurants. You know, we could talk about e-commerce the entire time. What we'd say is, you know, grocery e-commerce in the U.S. Accelerated about 10 years worth of growth in 2 months. So if we would have projected out the base of sales over the next 10 years, we're there today, right? So we went from about 3% of our sales online to around 10 to 12% today. And as Brian pointed out, yes, we will come back to some level of normalization as stores open, but we think the base rate will continue to be much higher category after category. You know, so sales were up 50% in April online. They're still up around 35%. And, you know, certain categories, I'll just point out electronics very quickly. Best Buy, which is one of our large retailers, did an amazing job of, whilst all their stores were closed, bringing on buy online, pick up curbside, couldn't go in the store. They were able to retain 85% of their sales in the depth of the pandemic. And they just reported their June sales, and they were actually up year on year. So, you know, retailers who are agile to adapt their business models will come out of this, you know, much better than others. Go to the next slide, please. You know, and then just looking at the world of food, but this is really in all retail, you really have to rethink the business model. Converting stores into the bottom right, Amazon had big plans to open up an Amazon store in California. They never opened the store, and they're using it as a dark store to fulfill from there. And you can see in the top thing, starting to bring in robotics, micro-fulfillment centers, taking existing assets and converting them into online fulfillment. And as those trends continue, we're going to have to keep up. You know, does COVID usher in an age of contactless experiences? I used to show this slide all the time. This is a restaurant called Wow Bao. It's completely automated restaurants. You order by mobile phone, iPad, you pick up in the cubby holes on the right. I used to show this slide, and people would be sort of like, "My God, where's the where's the human interaction? Where's the the warmth of this?" Now people are looking at this and saying, "Well, this is a contactless way to go." You know, obviously Brian touched upon, I think we're going to have new standards for safety, new standards for sanitation, cleanliness. That becomes almost a greens fee in a bar, if you will, of just getting customers to shop. Cultures will shift, and norms will shift. I spent a lot of time in Asia and Korea in particular. There was never any issue in Korea in terms of wearing masks out in public. In the US, people are very hesitant to do so. You know, so does something like this change the way we think about our practices? Or, you know, if you go to the next slide, you know, I used to put this slide up here and say, isn't this an amazing, you know, shared experience, people communing over food and trying new things. Will we go back to this, or do you look at this slide today and say, my God, that's appalling, you know, there's no food safety or sanitation practices. So things can change, you know, very, very quickly. I've been going around the world and basically speaking on retail moving to the extremes: extreme value, extreme convenience, and extreme experience. And we've reflected a lot on this, on what does COVID mean for these trends. And I think it's only going to accelerate these trends as we go through. And the real one that we kind of think about is experience, right? And what happens to experience. So value, I'll go through this very quickly. Value retail was winning before COVID. Value retail will win after. Retailers who have evolved their business model, who are focused on low prices, private label, kind of a treasure hunt environment, are going to win. And Anastasia, you can just kind of flip through these quickly. You know, so these are the elements of value: price, kind of the thrill of discovery, and having very strong private label. And, you know, retailers around the world who do that, Costco, of course, is almost the poster child for delivering that. Aldi, which I know you have in your market and growing quite fast, the same thing. So nothing's going to happen to value. In fact, it will be accelerated through, you know, a recession. Winning with extreme convenience. We used to call this frictionless shopping, and now you can also use the word contactless. But ways to deliver product to customers through enhanced technology, subscription services, and the elements of e-commerce, delivery, pickup, are really going to accelerate in a post-COVID era. And, you know, if you think about it, and nothing really became even more true during the pandemic, is that we can't put barriers in the way of customers trying to buy, right? And so we want to remove those barriers at all costs. And if you go to the next slide, you know, retailers in the US who were ahead of the game in this, and this is Walmart, who have been redeploying their assets to buy online, pick up in store, in-store pick, technology, are in much, much better shape through this period. Amazon, of course, who is pioneering contactless and frictionless checkout through Amazon Go. We're going to see these kinds of services enhanced. And again, where you might say this is sterile, this now becomes part of the future. Farmer's Fridge, which had vending machines for fresh salads, shifted very quickly in the pandemic to delivery. The final trend, yeah, as we talk about delivery, of course, around the world and services, the final trend, and the one that probably I scratch my head the most about, is extreme experience. And, you know, this is a Starbucks roastery, and we'd be putting that up as a, you know, fantastic example of the elements of experience, you know, getting people to stay in the store and linger, having customers participate in the process, you know, essentially building the brand in the store. This becomes much more difficult when you can't have customers coming through your stores, right? So the almost existential question is, what does experience look like in this next era? We have a wonderful retailer, the next slide, Wegmans, that, you know, so by the way, this is one of our last Tabletop meetings. We were in Milan and the Starbucks roastery, and how wonderful that was. And then you look at how hard it is to you know, replicate this experience in the pandemic. Wegmans, which is probably our best supermarket in terms of creating experience around the northeast coast of the US, you know, what the founder said is our business has been treating customers as guests and entertaining them, right? The store became entertainment, in-store bakeries, in-store eating, extensive food bars. He says, we can't do that. You know, how do we replace our mojo, right? What does experience look like in this new period of time? And I think that's, you know, really the question to ask. And this is a Wegmans store, which was once so vibrant. The salad bars are shut down, the prepared foods are shut down, as is bulk bakeries, packaged. It's no longer that same experience. So I think one of the questions we ask ourselves is, how do you replicate experience in a COVID area? And it will be done. It will be done. And we saw some of the examples Brian gave: concierge services, virtual settings, by appointment only. I think we'll see new ways to deliver experience. And I think we all know this quote, but never more true, that this is going to be about change, and who can adapt fastest will determine retail success in the future. So Anastasia, I thank you for having me. I'm anxious to learn and participate in the rest of the seminar that you have. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Really appreciate it, and always good to see the insights of what's going on around the world from our global partners. And yeah, a nice, very quick summary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was great. And Neil, we'll look forward to you joining us for the Q&A and panel discussion at the end. So a great overview. So appreciate it. All right, let's move to Anthony, if we may. I've given Anthony's introduction. So Anthony, you there?
I am, Brian, I am.
Fantastic. All right, well, you're living and breathing it, owning 17 retail shops in New South Wales and through into Tasmania. What are you seeing out there as an opening comment as a retailer?
I think I'm very fortunate right now to be in regional New South Wales and Tasmania, which is essentially shut off from the rest of the world. We have been insulated pretty much from what's been going on. Regional towns have got a lot more space, a lot more physical distancing, so we don't see the effects of people sort of working from home. And if anything, our foot traffic is actually up, which is bucking the trends. Like Shopper Track numbers that came out last week is 25% decline year on year. We've definitely been one of the winners out of the people staying at home. Leisure wear has been up, as people are spending more time at home. With the cancellation of team sports, there's been a boom in individual sports, including surfing and skateboarding. And especially through the lockdown, people were still allowed to go surfing, and skating, which was a great thing for us. My heart goes out for particularly CBD retailers or city retailers and mall-based retail, and those in Melbourne and Victoria.
And what do you think of some of the pressure points coming up for Australian retailers through this next 6 months? 12 months?
Yeah, good question. The supply chain has had a number of disruptions in our little sector. Obviously China shut down. A lot of apparel comes out of India and Bangladesh. They've had shutdowns of different lengths as well. So any product that was ordered for July has essentially been put back to August. There's been a sort of between a 4 and a 6 week delay in the supply chain, and then the Toll had their global outage, which has caused some dramas as well. And then I think the feedback I'm getting from some of our supply partners is getting containers through the ports is also a lot slower than what it was. So I think this summer there's going to be supply chain issues of various degrees. I think the cost of doing business is obviously going to rise. That's in part being propped up by government support at the moment. But when that sort of stops, I think it's going to be more expensive to run stores going forward. Like with the cleaning regimes and the cost of products and whatnot.
And I was also interested to understand this. You're dealing with 12 to 15 different landlords. I know Simon will pick up on this, but at various stages of negotiation, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's been it's funny at the start of it. I said to my senior leadership team, I said, this is going to be a really interesting process to see how people behave and how brand partners behave and how landlords behave. And, you know, we've got as you said, 15 different landlords across the traps, and some have been absolutely amazing to deal with, and others have been absolutely like pulling teeth. Some, you know, I've just got a cycle of sending a reminder email that we need to talk every 2 weeks, and I get, you know, the sound of crickets back. We've had a number, you know, by and large, private landlords have been amazing to deal with. We've actually had, you know, a couple of private landlords where, you know, that have offered blanket rent free for a number of months, and you know, when we started trading okay, we in those particular stores, we came back to them and said, hey, listen, send us the invoice, because it's, you know, we're doing okay.
I guess one of the other topics for this is around online. And so, as I recall, you were one of the early adopters. In fact, I was looking back at a piece of work we did with you in 2012, and you were certainly in the online, just really quite a pioneer in that space. So has it been challenging to adapt the business and your customers to having an online offer? I know you're sort of really moving back into it quite quickly now. What's been the experience there, Anthony?
Yeah, we were one of the first. Well, we actually beat Surf Stitch to market in 2009, so we were one of the first online accounts for many industry brands. We closed the store down not long after that piece of work that you're talking about, because it just got too difficult. We got swamped by the promotional activity online. We also, the platform that we were using was, you know, it wasn't great, in all honesty. So we made the decision to shut down the online store in 2012, and then lick our wounds and revisit it at a later date. You know, we're, like I said, a small family business, and I need every single store contributing to the greater good of the business, and we were bleeding money out of it, and at that time it made sense. In about 3 years ago, we were tossing up whether to do online, and then the opportunity for red herring in Tasmania came up. At that point, we needed to grow the scale of the business, so we chose the Tasmanian route instead of the online route. We have only got a small team, so we can only do a certain number of, you know, projects as we go. Mm-hmm. But we've been madly working, you know, from now, or from, you know, earlier this year with Shane Lenton. Shane's been amazing help for us, and yeah, and we've got the functionality, and you know, we're going to go from being, well, non-existent to, you know, top 10%.
And so, when you look at the next 6 months to even 2 years, Anthony, in terms of growth, do you see it more in online, obviously, or do you see it still an opportunity to grow physical environment stores as well?
I think in certain locations there's opportunity for physical stores, and, you know, like the numbers that we've been doing, but, and it's not across the board, you know, particularly our stores on the mid-north coast and also Tasmania have been trading quite well. And whereas, you know, some mall-based stores and Western New South Wales stores have been harder work. I think our focus is 100% on getting the online, you know, the online functionality right, and getting that, you know, contributing to the business, and then we will, you know, relook at physical opportunities.
If you had the time again, looking through the start of COVID, particularly sort of that January, February window to now, would you have done anything differently in the way you've run the business? Are there any learnings there for other retailers that you step back and think through?
Oh, that's a tough one. Yeah, you've got to play it as you see it at the time. You know, we made sure that we were communicating with our team, with our people. You know, we had a regime, you know, where we were, you know, discussing what was going on with them, 3 days a week. Three separate, you know, communication pieces. And and if we didn't know something, we were open and honest about it and told them so. So, you know, I think it was difficult to navigate. You know, obviously the government had mixed messages. You know, should we be open? Should we be closed? I don't think we'd do anything different, no.
What about things like your marketing and communication, your social media, keeping your customers engaged, that you are open, and some of your loyalty programs and things? Did they become more important in this period?
So we spend a lot of our marketing is also centered around our obviously social media channels are really good for, you know, business like ours. And a lot of our social media activity is centered around our ambassadors that we have. So people that we engage with, you know, essentially they're an extension of the business, friends and families, sponsored surfers, skaters. And so, you know, we come from a real community aspect point of view. So we've just continued down that merry way. I don't think our audience wants to know that, you know, that we're a COVID safe environment. I think that's assumed that, you know, we're doing the right thing, and, you know, and they see that when they come into the stores.
And as you look across, you know, having served on the ARA and looking nationally, do you see more of the same for the next 6 months, or do you think these respective state lockdowns will determine, you know, how quickly this rebound occurs?
I think I'm going to have to agree with Neil. It's absolutely impossible to predict. You know, who knows? And the longer this goes on for, the more change will be embedded. We saw, you know, up here when restrictions got lifted, life kind of went back to normal quite quickly. And I think that's the way humans are hardwired to, you know, get over the lump and go back to normal programming. And we saw that in what was going on here. But I think, you know, as the longer it goes on, and obviously depending upon areas as well, you know, Melbourne is obviously going through a lot more pain and pressure than what we ever will. So it'll be, you know, a longer road back.
Yeah, it's certainly our view in the insights work, and we've been saying this for a while, you know, that the human being instinct is to be social, generally speaking. And so we do see this coming back to something close to what we've experienced over time. But I think, as you rightfully say, as this contactless retail COVID type period continues, the more hardwired the practices and the learnings become for consumers. So now, of course, I can do business with your company or any other retailer in all different types of ways. And this topic about being agile plays a part too, doesn't it? Being able to make changes from everything to product range, to local marketing, to whatever it might be, much quicker than we used to be able to do. Is that fair to say?
Oh, spot on, 100% fair. And yeah, the agile is definitely one of the key words of the times, and pivot and, you know, nimble and whatever ones you want to say. But I think it's spot on. You know, you've just got to play it as you see it and just be aware of what's going on.
Well, really appreciate that session, Anthony. So what we'll do is also invite you to stay for our panel. Is there anything else you wanted to add, or we'll keep it for the Q&A if you want?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Anthony. Terrific. So we'll now pass to Simon to take us with an up-to-date blow-by-blow description of what's going on in the property scene. Simon, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Welcome, we can.
So thank you, Anastasia and Brian, for having me back. Fascinating presentation by all so far. My session today will be concentrate on 3 topics, which are, as shown, just a little bit of a legislative update, just a recent court case, and some tales from the front line. I've got to say, yeah, as a general opening, that the whole space of retail leasing is still in a big mess. And that's a blanket statement. As Mr. Wilson said, there's pockets that are getting resolved quickly. Some tenants are getting through their negotiations well, but by and large, there's a lot of negotiations still stuck and stalling. And the recent announcement this week about the JobKeeper extension is going to further confuse the market because obviously this will require a legislative change, and a lot of retailers and landlords will now have to rethink the way that they negotiate, and I'll discuss that going forward. So if we just start with the JobKeeper extension. So everyone knows now the federal government extended the JobKeeper program. So this is the issue that at the moment there's been no announcement from the states as to whether or not the pandemic period will be extended. Now, most people who I speak to say that it will. So in other words, each state is scheduled to expire around the end of September. However, they all have provisions to extend it. So if you are still on if you're still on JobKeeper program by the end of September, and it's now been extended to March, logic would say that the pandemic period will be extended, or if it's not extended in the way that we expect, it will come into what's called a reasonable recovery period. So each state has the legislative armour to be able to deal with this issue. But again, there's now confusion as to whether or not, well, if we're going to have another 6 months of pandemic period, do we continue to negotiate? And that's having an impact on deferrals and waivers. In terms of a legislative update, there's not been a huge amount. The only one that's been significant has been the New South Wales government, where they've now defined what a lessee must do in order to qualify for the COVID relief. So prior to this, there was no statement, but now they've inserted clause 5A, which basically says that it's the responsibility of the lessee to provide a statement that they are actually an impacted lease, and they must provide that evidence that they are an impacted lease. And if they don't do that, the lessor is taken to have complied with this clause. So the evidence that the lessee is an impacted lease, that's actually not defined, but as we discussed previously in our State of the Nations, BAS statements, evidence from accountants, audited statements, they generally qualify. So that sort of clears up the burden of proof, if you like, which is now falling to the lessee. The other interesting provision that they've added is that the retail and commercial leases extends to renegotiation commenced but not completed before the commencement of the amendments. So, for example, if you are in the process of renegotiating your lease and that commenced prior to the amendments of the COVID-19, well, then they're now included, except if the proceedings have commenced in a court. So that's another important clarification that wasn't there a few months ago. So again, something to be aware of when you're, as a retailer, if you're negotiating. The other interesting court case that's just been published is the TM Lewin court case, which most people would be aware that TM Lewin is an international men's fashion chain that has unfortunately gone into administration. And basically the federal court has ruled, not surprisingly, the first point that administrators are not personally liable for the rents pursuant to any leases. That's not new. But the second part is interesting in that if a group of companies is under administration, then the administrator is within their rights. In fact, it's their call as to whether or not it's in their best interest not to pay rent, because it provides a chance of maximising funds available for creditors. Now, obviously, a creditor will include the landlord. So a landlord is a creditor, but is usually not a secured creditor. So that's an interesting twist on what would be expected normally. So a lot of companies, if they are going into administration, the administrators now have a lot of power to be able to determine, whether or not they pay rent or seek extensions for paying rents. The next slide is more about what's happening on the front line. And I've got to say, there's still quite a lot of confusion about what are your rights and obligations. And one of the issues that's coming up is these settlement deeds. So most retailers who've been through this process may or may not have received this sort of settlement deed, which I've listed on that slide, which basically says words to the effect of, the landlord provides you this amount, and this is a full and final settlement of your COVID relief, and you may not bring any future claims for abatement. Now, these settlement deeds are binding, so retailers are getting confused that they may sign this and then they believe that the legislation allows them to go back. Well, it actually doesn't. So you need to be careful when you are signing settlement deeds that you actually believe that that is the amount and that's the final amount. And if you do believe it, well, that's great. But if you don't, then you need to be careful that you don't snook yourself. The second issue that is creating quite a lot of confusion is when there is a deferral of rent in place, then rent cannot increase until that deferral has been completed. So if you go to the next slide, I've given you an example. So let's take a situation where the lease commences on the 1st of January 2019 and expires in 2024, and there's normal escalations annually on the anniversary, which is January. The pandemic period is as per specified, and there is a deferral, but there's also a repayment period for 50 months. So the rent escalations are waived during the pandemic period as per what we discussed, but also rent escalations are waived during the whole deferment repayment period. But given that repayment periods are greater than 2 years or the remainder of the lease, technically all escalations are waived until the end of the lease. There's landlords and retailers are getting confused about that, and it's something that needs to be clarified. Now, having said that, most of the retailers I deal with or speak to and the consultants that work with them are not really going for deferrals. The majority of the deals are waivers, but there are deferrals in place. But I have seen this clause not being done properly. So just a little bit of a cautionary note on that issue. And I guess the last thing I'll say before I hand back to Brian is that there has to be a high degree of caution when negotiating with retailers and landlords on both sides. So there has been a lot of discussion recently in the media about rents being predetermined on turnover basis. That's been well documented. There is no requirement under legislation to renegotiate leases based on turnover. There is a requirement to adjust the rent during the pandemic period based on a drop in turnover, but there's no requirement going forward for landlords to change their business model to permanently move to that arrangement. So there's been I guess a big push by both some retailers and some smaller retailers who also feel that that is the new normal. Now, it may well be that some retailers and landlords do agree to that, but there's no requirement to do that. So I just thought I would clarify that. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation. I'm back to you, Anastasia and Brian.
Thanks, Simon. Really appreciated and very clear some advice there, which I think is going to be very useful for everyone listening. Again, just a reminder, if you do have any questions for our panelists, please send them through the Q&A function, and we'll ask all questions at the end to all the panelists. Fantastic. So I'd now like to welcome Belinda McPhee, who's going to give us an update on all HR relevant matters and what we've seen with the changes in the recent weeks. So over to you, Belinda.
Thanks so much, Anastasia. Thanks, everyone. It's been a very interesting few weeks since the last webinar in terms of employment legislation updates. So I'll look forward to sharing some of those with you. So as referred to earlier in our session, everyone's heard that JobKeeper 2.0 has been announced. So the great news is that the program's been extended until March 2021. And all of the current scheme arrangements remain in place until 27 September 2020 for all of the current arrangements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through some of the employment related changes to JobKeeper 2.0, and Joel's going to take you through some of the mechanics around some of the eligibility criteria and various other elements. So just before, sorry Anastasia, if we can just go back for a moment. Thank you. So in terms of the new program, so essentially what Treasury have done is to change the amounts that are paid for JobKeeper to avoid what's been termed as an adverse incentive to have people not working, because in some cases, the current JobKeeper payment arrangements that are being received are higher than what they would have been earning pre-JobKeeper. So I'm sure we've all had experiences with, you know, different friends, family, colleagues, some of your own staff, and what we've heard in the media where there have been some team members who are refusing to come back to work in some cases, some that go missing in action, particularly those regular and systematic casuals, and that they're not making themselves available because they're receiving JobKeeper. So one of the ways to avoid that moving forward from a Treasury perspective is to introduce what's called a two-tier payment system. So the first change to the payment system will happen from the 28th of September, and that will carry through until the 3rd of January. And at that point, what will happen is the top tier of income earners, so that's essentially all of your full-time and permanent part-time and casuals that have over 20 hours per week, will have their $1,500 fortnight JobKeeper reduced to $1,200 per fortnight. Also with the introduction of the bottom tier, and the bottom tier is essentially for any casuals or part-timers who work less than 20 hours, they'll actually have their fortnightly JobKeeper reduced to $750 per fortnight. So that's the key change that's going to happen from the 28th of September until the 3rd of January. Then the second round of changes will happen from the 4th of January 2021 until the 28th of March 2021, where the top tier will reduce again from $1,200 per fortnight to $1,000 per fortnight for those full-time, part-time and casual staff members that work over 20 hours per week. And the bottom tier for casuals and part-timers working less than 20 hours will go to $650 per fortnight. So that's the key financial changes that will occur from the 28th of September onwards. Again, Joel will talk through some of the mechanics around that. But the important thing to note is all of the JobKeeper Fair Work amendments that are in place. So there was changes to the Fair Work Act a number of months ago to support and complement all of the JobKeeper changes within Parliament. So everything, including the JobKeeper enabling directions and some of the changes to the various awards, will at this stage remain in place. So we'll watch this space, but largely there's nothing that you need to do until the 28th of September to obviously prepare for the next round of changes. Just some other changes in terms of government restrictions just to call out, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. But when we talk about the state of Victoria, obviously our colleagues and the community in Victoria is not doing so well, as we know at the moment. So it was mandated from Wednesday this week that face coverings are to be in place for everyone aged 12 years and over if you're leaving home. And that includes the workplace, including office and retail. So a very important point to know for those Victorian retailers that don't already have this in place is that employers are required to provide personal also the and you until August, as will the stage 3 restrictions for metropolitan Melbourne and the Mitchell Shire. For New South Wales, the advice still remains as is. So there's still the key restrictions around gathering, the 4 square metre rule, physical distancing, all of the hygiene and safety requirements, self-isolation and quarantine requirements. And important to note, which a lot of people aren't aware of, the position from the New South Wales government is that employers must allow employees to work from home where it's practical to do so. So I know that a lot of businesses are directing people to go back to work. And in cases where there's obviously genuine workplace health and safety issues or individuals' health and safety concerns, employers must be flexible to allow people to work from home if that's at all possible to do so. In terms of some other changes to other states, so Queensland stage 3 restrictions commenced on the 10th of July. So they still have their 4 square metre rule in place. They still have rulings in place around the number of occupants in businesses. And they're still wanting, obviously, businesses to ensure that they have their COVID safety plans and checklists in place, even though obviously the state is doing much better than New South Wales and Victoria. So just making sure that those Queensland restrictions and requirements are in place for businesses is important. And for those businesses that have stores in New Zealand, just some important changes to note, which is obviously good news because New Zealand's faring quite well through their recovery with COVID. So New Zealand businesses still need to ensure that hygiene safety practices are in place for their workers in the workplace, but it's optional to actually pass those hygiene requirements onto your customers or any visitors that you might have into your business. So again, it's not a compulsory requirement, it's just something that's recommended but not essential. And it's also important to note that physical distancing and contact recording for visitors and those elements aren't mandatory anymore in New Zealand, which is a great thing. So that's just some updates in terms of government restrictions. In terms of general employment relations updates, again, there was lots of legislative changes effective 1 July that I just thought I'd call out and share with you. So I'm sure most of you would have heard that the Fair Work Commission announced the annual wage review for 2020. So they announced quite a modest increase to wages of 1.75% increases to the minimum wage. So that applies to all award wages, but there's a staging approach in place with most of the team on the call that are affected by the General Retail Industry Award. Those pay increases aren't affected until the 1st of February 2021, but other awards, there's some staging that occurs throughout the next few months in terms of when those increases are in place. The other thing to note is the high income threshold limit has changed. So for unfair dismissal, the unfair dismissal threshold has now been increased to 153,600 for FY21. So that's a 4,900 increase on FY20. So just important for you to note when you're dealing with employment matters that might relate to termination or any other matters. And some good news in terms of Sunday penalty rate reductions. The General Retail Industry Award was updated.
I think we may have lost Belinda there. We'll see if should we get her back shortly. What we may do then in that case, we'll give her a second, see if she's come back online. Are you there, Belinda?
Sorry, everyone. Yes, I'm back online. Apologies for that.
All good.
So I'm sorry, I just was talking about the Sunday penalty rate changes. So for the General Retail Industry Award, they took place on 1 July. So what that means is there's a reduction for penalty rates for permanent employees that work on Sunday, but for casual employees, there are no changes. So just to clarify what that means for businesses. So that's just some general updates from all of the employment relation changes. And also as it relates to JobKeeper and obviously reduced hours and some of the flexibility provisions, just to call out is the Fair Work Commission did decide to extend some of the temporary flexibility provisions. So one of the key provisions that you would have heard about in the media is the whole notion of unpaid pandemic leave. So that's been increased in a number of awards. So essentially that's 2 weeks unpaid leave for team members that don't have eligibility to any form of paid leave. And essentially what that means, and if I use Victoria as an example, the Victorian government is providing what's called a coronavirus worker support payment, which is a one-off payment of $1,500 for an employee that's not able to work due to the fact that they're isolated because of COVID and they have no income during that period and have no leave entitlements. So pandemic leave is legislated in awards, so you have to provide 2 weeks unpaid leave, but the Victorian government has given people the ability to have a one-off payment, which they can apply through the Victorian government. And then also yesterday, the Victorian government announced that they've extended this scheme to include a $300 support payment to encourage, obviously, team members who are waiting for their COVID test results not to go back to the workplace, to encourage them to stay at home. So I'm sure you've read and heard about a lot of the media coverage where there's a particular issue in Victoria with casual workers and people that don't have any paid leave entitlements that are actually going into the workplace when they're waiting for test results or when they're symptomatic, which is not great. So the Victorian government's introduced those changes to try to encourage people to obviously quarantine and self-isolate. And in terms of the General Retail Industry Award, the pandemic leave has been extended until 31 July and probably will get extended again if Victoria, if the situation still continues as is. And some of the other key awards that might affect some of the people on the call, which is the Commercial Sales Award and the Clerical Award, those pandemic leave changes have been extended until the 30th of September. And the Clerical Award flexibility provisions also still remain in place. So just some other key updates briefly in terms of workplace health and safety. So a lot of the discussion we've had over the previous calls is there's a huge onus on safety and keeping employees and customers safe. In addition to all of the COVID safety requirements, there's been some legislative changes within Queensland for people that are self-insured. So just important to note that for those that have self-insured employment relationships in Queensland, that's a requirement that you report your injuries and any payments made to workers to the insurer. So that's effective 1 July. And also a significant change in Victoria to the workplace manslaughter legislation. So the state is implementing harsher penalties, fines up to $6.5 million for duty holders, and up to 20 years in jail for individuals. Obviously, if there's proof of severity and neglect under those new workplace manslaughter changes to legislation. So something for Victorian employees to be aware of. And last but not least, for some of our colleagues that have businesses in New Zealand, the New Zealand wage subsidy was also extended. So the ability to extend throughout September, which is great for those that aren't aware of that change. And then also there's been some changes in terms of how the Holiday Act and bonuses are calculated in New Zealand. And there's also been an extension of paid parental leave in New Zealand from 22 weeks to 26 weeks. So again, that's only relevant for those people on the call that have businesses in New Zealand, but lots of legislative changes that I thought would be worth noting and to share with you for 1 July. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Belinda. That's fantastic. There's a lot of changes, it seems, that have come about since we last spoke. So anyone that does have any questions for Belinda, feel free to pop them into the Q&A, or alternatively, you can contact our panelists directly with questions through LinkedIn, or we will be sharing contact details later. Fantastic. And we're now going to move to Joel Hummel from Wheeler Grenfell, who's going to give us a bit of an update on the JobKeeper and what this means and how it's going to work. So over to you, Joel.
Thanks, Anastasia. Today I'm just going to quickly run through where we're up to with that JobKeeper, the pay-as-you-go withholding all the cash flow boost, and just quickly touch on the New South Wales Government $3,000 grant. So slide 2, the current JobKeeper program of $1,500 per fortnight per employee, it runs its course as announced and ends on the 27th of September 2020. So meaning the last JobKeeper payment under the current scheme will be paid in the first 2 weeks of October, subsequent to lodgement of your September income declaration. So therefore, for those currently in the JobKeeper scheme and receiving payments, there are still 3 more payments to receive for July, August and September, received the 2 weeks after the end of each month. On slide 3, if we now move on to the extended JobKeeper, as we've heard about, and Belinda's gone through this, we're moving from July, August and September, the end of the current scheme, which is 1 tiered payment, to October, November, December. You're moving to a 2-tier payment there, $1,200 per fortnight per employee working over 20 hours per week. And for those working under 20 hours per week, it's $750. And then we've got the second tranche, January, February, March. The top rate of pay of the JobKeeper goes down to $1,000 per fortnight per employee over 20 hours per week. And the lower one for people working under 20 hours per week is $650. Now, an interesting quirk on this new extension is, what is the 20 hours per week and what does it refer to? So according to the Treasury extension of JobKeeper payment information sheet they released, the 20 hours is determined by reviewing the average hours worked per week in the 4 weeks of pay periods before the 1st of March 2020. So we're talking about February 2020 is when we establish whether 20 hours or not has been worked for both eligible, that's for both your eligible employees and your business participants. Now, the Commissioner of Taxation will have the discretion to set out alternative tests on the hours for the business participants and employees, where their hours in February 2020 weren't usual, like they were on annual leave or sick leave or perhaps volunteering to help the bushfires. So that's that 20 hours is a bit quirky. I'm not too sure if it's going to change or not. It may well do. Now, slide 4, the eligibility. So towards the end of September, we move into the reapplying for the JobKeeper for October, November and December 2020. So applicants will have to pass, again, that 30% drop in GST turnover test. That is, a 30% drop in turnover will have to be demonstrated when comparing the GST turnover for the 6-month period from the 1st of April 2020 to the 30th of September 2020, compared to that same 6-month period in 2019. Then, as we move towards the end of December, applicants will have to again reapply the 30% drop in turnover test. Applicants will be required to demonstrate a 30% drop in turnover when comparing the turnover for the 9-month period from the 1st of April 2020 to the 31st of December 2020. So then it becomes a 9-month comparison with this year compared to 2019. Now, another quirk of the extended JobKeeper at this stage is you have to pass it quarter by quarter. So, for example, in that first 6-month period, 1st of April to the 30th of September 2020, you have to show you have dropped 30% GST turnover in each of those quarters. So it's going to be harder to pass, that's for sure. That's for sure. And at this point, these are announcements. There's no legislation. So the Prime Minister made it clear that the above is not set in stone and could be changed closer to the date, whether that be in September or December. So just quickly moving on to the cash flow boost, which unfortunately has not been extended, but it is still running, and we're moving on to the cash flow boost 2. So just to quickly recap, the government automatically is crediting businesses their pay-as-you-go withholding. The credit should continue for the pay-as-you-go withholding for June, July, August and September. Lodgement of your current and next few activity statements. The withholding offset is capped at $50,000 on activity statements that were up to June, 30th of June. That's cash flow boost 1. And then we've got a second cash flow boost of another 50,000, which is post 30th of June. So slide 6, we'll just go on to slide 6 there. What we're seeing currently in July is we're seeing the following for monthly BAS lodges. Lodges of the June BAS, when you lodge it in July, has resulted in the final balance of cash flow boost 1 being paid, where the cap, the 50,000 cap, hasn't been fully used up, plus a quarter of the cash flow boost 2 amount being credited to your BAS account with the ATO. Now, the cash flow boost 2 amount is equal to the cash flow boost 1 amount. The cash flow boost 2 amount is going to be received in 4 installments for your monthly BAS lodges, being on the June, July, August and September activity statements. So if we move on to slide 7, for quarterly lodges, the June quarter BAS, when lodged in July, is resulting in the final balance of the cash flow boost 1, where again the cap has not been used up, the full 50,000, plus a 50% cash flow boost 2 amount. So the cash flow boost 2 amount, the same for monthly BAS lodges, is equal to what you received under the cash flow boost 1 amount. The cash flow boost 2 amount will be received by your quarterly BAS lodges in 2 installments upon lodgement of your June BAS and September BAS. So an incentive in a sense there perhaps to get your BASs in. Now, it's all meant to be, the cash flow boost is all meant to be automatic. Unfortunately, we're not finding it's always going that way. So you'll need to double check or get your tax agent to double check. You received the boost. And if you haven't got it, make sure you get onto the tax office on that email address there or call them on that hotline. Now, slide 9, I just wanted to quickly run through what the New South Wales government is offering, which is a new $3,000 grant. There's also other grants being offered by other states. So you need to double check with your state government body. But this New South Wales government grant is another $3,000, which was started on the 1st of July 2020. It's aimed at helping businesses get back up and running during COVID. So the eligibility there, it's limited to highly impacted industries, but that's pretty broad. I've got a link there and it covers a lot of industries, particularly retail. You've got food, your travel agents, hair and beauty industry, laundry and dry cleaning. So it covers a lot of businesses. On slide 10, there's a further eligibility requirements there But the key one I wanted to point out is point 2. If you've demonstrated that for JobKeeper, that you've had a drop of 30% in turnover, then this one is even easier. It's a 30% drop in turnover just for 2 weeks. A lot easier than the 75% that the $10,000 previous grant required. So if you pass this one, so if you pass the JobKeeper, it's very well possible you're likely to pass that. So the final slide there, we'll just move on to the final slide, slide 11. We note applications close on the 16th of August for this grant. So if you apply for this grant, make sure you have evidence of incurring eligible expenses. Your eligible expenses include fit-out changes, things like plastic barriers for checkouts. Any staff training you do is covered. Business advice from your accountant, cleaning products and additional cleaning services, your marketing, and any digital solution improvements you've got, like improvements to your e-commerce or business websites. It's all covered by this grant. You'll need to keep your receipts, of course, because these grants are being audited at a higher rate than what we've seen in the past. So that's all. I've just quickly run through those points. Let me know if you've got any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. That's great. Fantastic. So we will open up now to questions from our audience. So we've got quite a few here that I'll make a start with, and I think Brian might maybe have some that he wants to pop in.
In the remaining time, which is about 15 minutes, so we'll do exactly that, Anastasia. But thanks everyone for your contribution and your insights. It's always designed to help retail communities, and you've done a great job there, so thank you.
Fantastic. So to start with, this might be either for Neil or Anthony. What shifts with supplier retail terms have you seen? Heard of suppliers requiring payment for stock in advance, no terms, combined with an optimistic shift to online, so a bit of a challenge for brick and mortar. Are you seeing this in the US, Neil, or anything we can say there?
Yeah, I'll start with the US, and you know, what's happening is actually both extremes. So for smaller retailers and retailers who are troubled, low credit ratings, they're getting almost no credit extended at all, and at the same time, larger, better positioned retailers are imposing terms on suppliers, not taking shipments for fall goods and fashion and apparel, extending their terms. So it's a sort of a vicious example of the two extremes happening in the US.
So scale plays a large part in that relationship, Neil.
Yeah.
Anthony, anything on the coalface in terms of suppliers and credit trading terms? Anything to watch out for?
Yeah, I've heard of it happening. We haven't experienced it. We've got luckily great relationships with our suppliers, but I have heard of a number of the surfboard companies, particularly where it's, you know, they're paying for stuff up front. They're requiring payment before they ship.
It's interesting, isn't it? So really pressure on the supply chain, isn't it? Significant pressure there. And which you alluded to earlier, Anthony, obviously build up of inventory and a whole lot of cash flow pressures throughout the supply chain. Anastasia, any further?
Yeah, so another one, and again, focusing a bit on Neil and Anthony here. Smaller retailers have obviously always pushed the face-to-face experience as their point of difference. With this large move to online and contactless, how can smaller retailers keep that customer experience and that customer engagement? Have you seen any good examples? And I think some of the ones we talked about previously, like Brian, utilising the online and WhatsApp and subscriptions, but any examples from yourselves for the small retailers?
Yeah, I'll start in the US again. One of the really fascinating things that's happening here anyways is traffic is down and down considerably. Conversion and transaction size is up considerably. So if you think about it, it's a much more personal and a much more curated experience that retailers are having with their consumer. One of my clients is a company called Evereve that sells women's fashion apparel, affordably priced. And they've done a fantastic job of clienteling and keeping the customers that they have, setting appointments, doing virtual appointments, closet makeovers, everything they can to really focus on that personal experience of customers. So I think for smaller retailers, it's more about quality and the quality of the customer than it is about just, it used to be about the sheer bodies we want to get through our stores. It's really not about that anymore.
I think some of the work we're doing as well around really redefining unique point of difference, selling proposition, and getting very, very curated and sharp in that unique point of difference. So you're really cutting through the noise that's out there. And then in addition to that, focusing on having good CRM, database, ability to connect with customers well before they even come to your physical or online environment. The engagement in the store that Neil talks to and the way that occurs, the engagement online, and then the post-engagement strategy, keeping your customers into your community, into your loop, as it were. So I think there's some really good examples of that, and Wilson Retail do that in their surf and skate categories very well.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity, and I think for, like if independent retailers are going to be doing less business, the business needs to be more meaningful with greater margin. Pulling the price lever to stimulate sales, I think I'd be reimagining that strategy. I think the opportunity to connect more deeply into each community is definitely something that should be on the cards. Localized product, doing collaborations with local artists or local people within the community, and just really turning up the volume on. The national chains cannot replicate the community connection that an independent retailer has within their community.
One of the sort of the ironic pieces and one of the challenges I think in all this is that many retailers of all sizes, are really hanging on to cash in varying degrees. They're looking at these government incentives. They're looking at the job keepers of this world, and they're watching the cash flow. Paradoxically, to give that greater customer engagement, to make that a broader sale, to drive your average transaction and so forth, there needs to be an investment in training at an operational level and engaging staff into that experience, and also teaching them how to deal with customers in this COVID environment, if you like. And so you've got this interesting play about where do retailers spend their money in this particular piece of the puzzle. But we certainly advocate, getting closer and training. And we see a lot of this in our own mystery shopping we've done over the years. You watch the relationship of product knowledge and confidence to results. It's very obvious.
A question here for Joel. Are you aware of any alternative test criteria for new businesses? So businesses that have only commenced this year. Has anything changed there? Oh, Joel, I think you're on silent.
No, they still haven't addressed it. The new businesses, if you've started JobKeeper, if you've started your business after certainly the 1st of March and you haven't got people on the payroll as at the 1st of March, you've got it's not great.
Okay. And then another one, I don't know whether this is Joel or possibly Belinda, measuring the 20 hours. So you kind of touched on it on your talk, Joel. Is it the 1st of Feb to the 29th of Feb? So 4 days.
Yeah. So thanks, Anastasia. On the Treasury fact sheet, it refers to the 4 pay periods before the 1st of March, and it says what you're doing is you're taking the average of those 4 weeks, I think, to work out. So if you've worked, on average over those 4 pay periods, those 4 weeks, 20 hours, then you're there. But if you're under it, then you're on the lower tier. That's what it's looking like at the moment on the wording, but we're still waiting on further guidance on that.
Fantastic. Belinda, is there any changes in ACT that you've heard of?
Yeah, so thanks, Anastasia. So the ACT were meant to go to stage 3 this week, but they've just announced yesterday that they're going to remain on stage 2. So all of the current workplace health and safety requirements are in place as is for stage 2 and not looking to extend to stage 3. So there's no further changes in the ACT.
Okay, fantastic. So another question that's come in here on the chat: with some stores compromised, have you seen a prioritisation of additional online sales channels such as marketplaces? Are we thinking about that differently? So this is quite an open question here. If anyone's got some thoughts on, you know, we're not as much having the physical store. Is there, are retailers thinking differently about additional online channels?
E.g. marketplace. Neil, do you want to touch on that one, the play to marketplaces, the Amazonian growth and so forth?
Yeah, it's one that requires a really complicated answer, I would think, which is marketplace. In the US, we've seen a number of large retailers, a number of large brands sort of capitulate to Amazon, start to sell on their platform. It provides a very quick revenue boost, but it often comes with some unintended consequences on margin, on losing control of the brand. So it is not an easy decision to do it. But that said, Amazon's extending their marketplace, Walmart's extending its marketplace. So it's going to become I think it's going to become something that retailers are going to have to navigate, but they really need to be careful about how they do it.
One thing I'd add to that is that when we look at the Amazon profile product, for example, over 80% of it is this lower value commoditized item. And so you've really got to be very category specific when you enter into this thinking. It really plays a part. Anthony, your thoughts on that one, on marketplaces?
Yeah, it's not. I guess the question is not all that applicable to us, because we're controlled by our supply partners on where we can and where we can't sell, and it's pretty specific that it's our own online channel, and that's it. We can't play within, you know, the marketplace space at all.
Just a couple of questions left, given our last few minutes. So Joel, specifically, and Joel, the real problem for many is solvency. Many SMEs are not able to understand solvency. What's your view about the looming insolvencies after the government lifts these solvency protections, November or February? I think we are on.
Yeah, no, understood. No, I got it. With solvency, well, at the moment, I can only talk about anecdotally about my client base. All my clients intend to continue. They don't see this as being their end. So from that aspect, from what I'm seeing, is there's still a hell of a lot of resilience still to run yet. I understand though that there are what would be termed, you know, what has been termed zombie companies, but basically companies with no future that are being basically kept alive purely for JobKeeper. So I believe there will be, obviously it's going to be a spike in insolvencies if it's not already happening, but that will, as previously mentioned, that's going to be really determined by how long this lasts. If we come out of this, the sooner we come out of this, the less insolvencies. The longer we stay in this, the more, I don't want to, use the word catastrophic, but the more dire things will be in terms of those insolvencies.
Fantastic. One aimed at Anthony. How will your sort of stores adapt to be even more destinational with customer experiences like co-creating product and customizations in store? Is this something that you've been thinking about, how to really become that destinational store?
Yeah, the co-creation piece is a really interesting one, and we've played around with it a couple of times before. A number of years ago, Oakley had a custom lab, and where you could design your own and build your own and sunglasses, and it was amazing. And we were one of only a handful of retailers in Australia that did it. And we're actively talking with suppliers on how we can do that. We have also done our own customized program where we've got a bunch of different logos that you can heat press your own cap in store. We're revisiting that as we speak. we're also, customer experience wise, with the new online store, one of the capabilities is going to be able to book an appointment, for mum and dad to come in with their kids and speak, and lock away some time with one of our experts in store and get the full lowdown on how to get in the water and what products they will and won't need. Also, wish lists, being able to build wish lists, at home on their iPad or on their phone, and then to be able to share that with their family and friends and come in. So we're looking at a number of different ways.
Fantastic. Just a couple more questions left to finish. So I know we've just about run out of time. There's a couple of interesting ones. One for Simon. I've got a tenant who is choosing not to open during the winter and choosing not to reopen until the summer and refusing to pay rent. Is there anything that the landlord can do in that situation?
Yeah, good question. Most leases have a requirement, what's called an obligation to trade. So it'll depend on what's in the lease. So if there's an obligation to trade, so either via hours that they must open, or that it's a general sort of essential term, then the tenant's in breach of their lease by not opening. So the landlord will have rights under the lease. So the tenant can't unilaterally choose to do things that are not in the lease. They can reduce the rent if based on turnover if they fall under the pandemic, but they can't just. It doesn't give them the rights to breach their lease. So generally, that would be dealt with in arbitration, where the arbitrator would say that the tenant must perform its obligations, including obligations to trade, and there would be normally a settlement. Now, there may be other issues that the retailer's going through. There may be solvency issues, as was just recently discussed. So, look, I guess the answer is generally there is an obligation to trade. The tenant's maybe in breach of that, but that probably could be sorted out in arbitration.
Fantastic. Thanks, Simon. And one final question, and this one is definitely a topic for discussion that I think could go on for a while. So maybe we'll just a quick overview. What's the panel's view on the future of shopping malls? So shopping centres, in particular, traffic is down, sales are down. What do we think is going to be next? So yeah, bit of a can of worms here, but maybe a quick one.
Well, in 30 seconds or less. They, like all the businesses, need to be adaptive, need to be relevant, need to think about their positioning. And I think we're going to see a shakeout, as Neil we're seeing in the US. I think the big experiential heartland centres, the A-grade centres, will survive this. We're seeing resurgence in community type centres. If you're in the middle, it's going to be challenging. Neil?
That's the perfect answer. I mean, I think we see about a third of our shopping centers in the US that will go out of business in the next 5 years, and a huge bifurcation that the A shopping centers will do just fine, and the C's and D's that were anchored by failing department stores in the US are in deep trouble. So they need to reinvent.
Our consumer research that we did recently as well is showing that the shift in consumers looking to this local community. So I think we're going to see very much this community shopping centre, so those that can really focus on being the heart of their community will do well throughout this, given the changing sort of customer behaviours that we see for the future.
I think that echoes in Anthony's comments about really building community profile, community presence. You can see it in the success of Wilson Retail, and you can see it in those centres and community hubs that are able to adapt and do this. So yes, I think that's a pretty good answer for everyone.
Yeah, I was going to say we could talk for a long time on that, but it's a nice, quick summary. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much to all of our panelists. As always, your contributions have been very detailed and very interesting. We will share the recording for anyone that's watching, and we will look at what slides we can share. So in particular, I know Joel and Belinda and Simon had a lot of content there. So for you all to reread later, it's probably very useful. We'll get in contact with you with an email, but as always, please feel free to reach out to myself, Anastasia, or Brian at Retail Doctor, or any of our panelists via their LinkedIn. You'll be able to contact them all. Any further questions, I'm sure we'll all be happy to address them.
And we're also very open to feedback on this format, if it's addressing the questions that you're dealing with day to day, which is the purpose. But once again, thanks very much to our panelists. It's a great contribution of your time, your expertise, and your willingness to help the community through this period. So thanks very much. And again, as Anastasia says, we're very happy to put any of our attendees in contact with you directly. Neil, I look forward to our next conversation for the meeting and all the matters there. Anthony, thank you very much. Continued success to each and every one of you. Thanks, Joel, Belinda, and Simon.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.